All right. So first of all, we have to start off thanking our special sponsor, Yechiel and Yael Racing family, who sponsored our official Daf Yomi Meds placeholders. Very important for Daf Yomi because you need to change it every single day. You can't sit in the same place. So this is a schus, a refuah shlema of Sarah Gittel Bas Mirel, Aaron Ali Melech Ben Brindle Leah, Mirel Bas Sarah Gittel, and Bluma Bas Mashli Shev refuah shlema. That's for you, sir. And please use them in good health. We are in Kufnun, Alma Bays at the top. The next 4 people who join can receive one as well because I've got 4 more. It's like the first word that we're at is Amarava. Amarav Nachman. So actually, it's a nice place to start. Quick review of some of the things that we already know. Then Rava says in the name of Rav Nachman Chamisha. There are 5 things. 4 of them we already have experience with. The 5th one is a brand new case. But there are 4 things that ad sheyichtivu kol nichsehem that they don't come into effect unless you transfer over everything, your entire property, right? If you only transfer over part of your property, these laws don't come into effect. The Eluhain, here are the 5. You got it? Good. Or you have the wrong volume? All right, that happens. Ve'eluhain, here they are. Shchiv meira, the first one is the shchiv meira, as we know, because if you transfer over all of your property, if you get better, then your property returns back to you. If you retain any of your property, then the gift is final. The rules of shchiv meira do not apply. That you are lying badly. Shchiv means to lay down being in bed, or shchiv meira. You wind up bedridden for being bad, right? Avdo, his slave, as we learned on Thursday, that if somebody transfers over property to his slave, if he's dying and he says to his slave, I'm going to give everything to you, the slave goes free. But if he leaves over any of his property, so then the presumption is that what he left over might actually be that slave, and therefore the slave is not freed. So therefore, if he leaves over anything, the slave is not freed. The next one is ishto, right? Circumstance is what if he leaves all of his property to his wife, right? So he leaves over all of his property to his wife. So I'm trying to think. I don't think we had this case. I think we mentioned it once, but it was in last parak. The circumstances that a person leaves all of his possessions over to his wife. The intent isn't to be able to give all of the possession to his wife, but the intent is to make her an administrator, responsible for administrating and taking care of the property of everybody. He just wants to be able to give her all of the responsibility so that everybody respects her. Okay. The next one is ubanov, being able to give over all of his property to his children. We'll explain. And then the last one, which is a new case, is mavrachas. Mavrachas, we'll explain what that new case is as well. Okay, so let's talk about where we know these rules from. Shchiv meira, the first one is the rules of the Shchiv meira Ditzanan we learned in our Mishnah, which we had before a few days ago. Shchiv meira shekasav kol nechasav lachirim, a shchiv meira who writes all of his possessions over to others. The shir karka kolshu, if he leaves behind any of the land for himself. Matanoso kayemes, then his present lasts. It's considered to be standing, and it does not return back to him if he gets better. Lo shir karka kolshu, if he doesn't leave any of the land behind, so then ein matanoso kayemes, then if he gets better, the present does not stand. It returns back to him because he gave everything away. Why? We had the explanation because we presumed that he was only giving it on condition that he was going to die, and the fact that he left nothing for himself indicates that that was in fact his thinking. But if he was leaving over anything, then we presume that the reason he left over something is because he was presuming he wasn't going to die, and therefore his present is considered a valid present because he was giving it regardless of whether he was going to die or not. Avdo, the next case was his servant, and we had this just the other day. Ditzanan, we learned in the Mishnah, kosev kol nechasav lavdo, person gives away all of his possessions over to his servant. Yatza ben chorin, he goes free. Shayir karka kolshu, if he leaves over any of the land, lo yatza ben chorin, then he is not free. Okay, because we presume that what he left over was the slave, which means his slave is not, he did not transfer ownership of his slave to his slave. He didn't set him free. And since he doesn't go free, the slave can't acquire any of the other property, so therefore nothing gets transferred. Ishto, the wife, is the Amar of Yehuda Amar Shmuel, the Rabbi Yehuda saying to Shmuel, Hakosef kol nechasav lishto, if somebody gives over all of his possessions to his wife, lo asa el apatropa, he's really not intending to give over everything, because a person, we presume, he doesn't want to take away all of the inheritance from his children. Therefore, why is he saying such a thing? Because he still wants to give over everything to his children. He just wants to create a circumstance where his wife becomes the boss of the household. So therefore, he's creating the circumstance where even though all of the property does belong to the children, the wife is going to be the administrator who takes care of it all. Banav, what about the case of his children? It's not, we learned in the Mishnah. Hakosef kol nechasav libanav, if somebody writes all of his possessions over to his children, v'kasav liishto karka kol shehu, and we had this case on Thursday, but he leaves over a little bit of land for his wife. So then of the ksubasa, we presume that she has accepted that land as payment of her ksuba. And as a result, she has no claim to the children's inheritance to pay for the rest of her ksuba. However, if he left over with a continuation of that was, if he left over metaltal, immovable items, then that wouldn't be considered a payment for the ksuba, and she has the right to be able to go claim the entire ksuba from the estate. 150A. We're still on, I think we're on A2. Yes, I think we're on A2. I think we move that quick. Mivarachas. What about the case of Mivarachas? Mavrachas. Mavrachas is Mavrachas Tzricha Shetichtov Kol Nechaseha. A Mavrachas is a wife who has children from a previous marriage, and she has property. She knows that if she gets married, her husband becomes the primary heir of her property. Well, she doesn't want that because she wants to be able to retain that property for her children. So therefore, how does she make sure to protect that property from her husband? She gives it away to one of her children before she gets married. She says, here, this is all yours. Well, if it's all his, then the husband can't inherit it if she dies. So that's what she does. She transfers away everything. But if she has to transfer over everything. She transfers over some of it. We presume that she really is she's really, in fact, giving a gift to her child. When she gets divorced or the marriage ends, so then she can collect it back, just like these other cases, like the Shchiv Meirah kind of a case where we're presuming it's an umdana, that the reason why she gave away all of her possessions was only to protect it from her husband. Now that she's no longer married to this husband and that no longer becomes a concern, she gets all of her stuff back. That's what the Mavrachas case is.
They have to relinquish it.
And they have to relinquish it.
Okay. So
right?
They have to agree, consent to giving it back.
They don't, it's presumed to be that the intent that she had when she gave them the gift was that if she was no longer married, they would give it back. That's presumed to be, even though that was not actually specified. Now, I'm saying that, but that's actually what my explanation is actually my focus between Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi seems to say that it is it has to be specifically specified. She has got to say, and you know that if this marriage doesn't work out, I'm going to come and take the land back, right? And they have to agree to it, like you said. It has to be something that's pre-agreed upon at the beginning of the transaction. Tosfos says, well, then what's the point of this? Any kind of transaction, you can make any kind of condition with any transaction. There's no chiddush. There's no novelty to the idea that I'm giving you a transaction. If I come and say, you know what? I'm going to give you a gift if the Yankees win the World Series, and then they don't, again, then you have to give me it back. Of course, what was the condition of the deal we made? Why is there any chiddush? That's what Tosfos says. Really, this is another case of umdana where we're making a presumption that was the wife's intent, even if she doesn't actually specify it. So I gave what I consider to be the easier to understand explanation.
Ancient prenup in a way.
Almost like that, yeah. Except that this is kind of like a prenup would be a nicer way to go, right? A prenup and there's nothing wrong with a prenup. If they had written a contract that says, hey, at the end of this marriage, you're going to take this and you're going to take this, and they all sign it and everybody agrees to it, that would be one thing. But, right? But this is like,
and if the kids spend through it, on like the gambler or whatever, and
then there's nothing left to collect, right? It all depends on what it is now. Land, right? So. Mm-hmm. Okay, now, ubekuluhu, in all of these cases, metaltli havishir, if you leave over any movable items from your property, all of these cases, now this, as we said, was some of these were subject to machlokas, but this Gemara presents it as a done fact that any movable items is considered to be leftover property. Remember that we had that conversation, wasn't so clear to everybody when it came to the case of the shliv meira, whether in fact movable property, leaving over movable property was a something that was going to invalidate the contract, but we said that that was one of Rav Yosef's very nice explanations. We said that was a very good explanation that he gave, because why? Because the whole point is he's leaving over enough money for him to be able to survive off of. Okay, so in all of these cases, we're going to say a summary of this, all of these cases, if the thing that you left over happens to be movable property, that's also going to be an exclusion. It's going to cause the case not to go into effect. Lebar miksuba, but that's not the case. The only exception to that rule is the case that we had with the woman in her ksuba case. If you remember, in that case, mikarkoi takin rabbanan metaltali lo tikkun rabbanan, that the rabbanan established that the collection of ksuba only happens through land, and therefore, if she accepts movable property, she's not taking that as a payment for her ksuba, and therefore, her agreement to allow the rest of the land to get transferred over to the children is not acquiescence to the deal, because she knows that she has the right to be able to collect from land. It's only if he gives over some land to his wife that that's considered to be payment of the ksuba. That's the one case where movable items and land make a difference. All the other cases, movable property and land do not make a difference. Okay. A Maimar says, Metaltali diksibi biksuba, ve'isnu behinayu havi shiur. If it gets specified in the ksuba contract, and let's say, for example, we call this an apotiki, right? A person says, you know what? I'm going to designate some specific item to pay your ksuba, right? Here's, $10,000 cash. I'm leaving this money here. This is to pay your ksuba. I'm not going to touch it, not going to do anything. This is the money. And it's beinai, who it stays as established property that nobody uses or takes. That can actually be considered payment for a ksuba. That's how he feels about being able to use movable property as payment for a ksuba. There is a circumstance. If it gets designated and it gets reserved and it doesn't get used and it stays around, then that could be considered a ksuba payment. So that way, if he gave away everything else to all the children and said, here, by the way, remember that ksuba payment, the suitcase full of $10,000 that I was going to give you? That, here you go, right? That could be considered a payment for a ksuba. Okay, so that's an exception to the case according to Maimar. Okay, now, Amar nichsai liplanya. So let's say a person says, I want to give over my nechasim, my possessions, to so-and-so. What does the word nechasim mean? Right? What's included in my possessions? So we're going to go through several mishnayos, and we're going to prove that various types of items are included in that phrase, right? Which is the kind of the theme of what we are doing in this parak, which is what is the general intention by language that is used. So let's say, he says, Nichsai leplanya, my possession is going to so-and-so. Avda, his servant, his slave, ikri nichsei. That is considered to be nechasim. That's for sure. It's not. How come? Because we learned in a Mishnah. HaKosef, the Mishnah we've already seen a couple of times. HaKosef kum nechasav lavdo. If a person transfers over all of his possessions to his slave, Yatzav ben Chor, and he goes free. Why? Because the slave is nechasav. Now, we didn't know whether a slave is karka. We didn't know if slave is land. We didn't know if slave was metaltal, if it was movable items. But one thing we do know is it is property. So the word nechasim includes slaves. That's for sure. Okay? So that's number one. Ara, land, is ikri nichsi. Also, land is also called property. Right? How do we know? Ditznan, Mishnah says. Nechasim sheyesh lan achrayas niknim bekesef v'shtar v'chazaka. Mishnah says, property which has responsibility, which bears responsibility, explain that in a moment, can be purchased with money, with a contract, or by somebody taking possession of it. Now, what does it mean when we have property that has achrayas? When we give something over to somebody else, we presume that that deal is final, the transaction is finalized. But when it comes to transactions of land, no deal is really ultimately final. That every piece of land that we own is considered to be mortgaged to any previous debt that we have, right? Why? Because if a person comes, let's say the bank comes and takes a look at what items I own in order to determine if they'll lend me money, They want to be able to see, oh, he owns a house, he owns land, he owns fields. So therefore, if we loan him $1,000 and he doesn't pay us back, we know we can always collect this land. Okay. So in the Jewish law, every piece of land is always that a person owns at the time that he borrows something is considered mortgaged to that loan by default. Right? It could be specified as non-mortgage, but by default, that's the way that it works. Now, if somebody then takes his mortgaged land and sells it to somebody else, the guy says, great, I need more money. So now I'm going to sell my fields. And he goes and sells his field to somebody else. Now the bank comes and says, hey, we want to collect your $1,000. Hey, where'd all your fields go? So the bank can go to the person who bought the field and collect the field back from them. And then the guy who bought the field has to go back to the original owner and say, give me my money back. So the bank doesn't have to be the one that collects. The person who bought the field has to be the one who collects. So whenever somebody's buying a piece of land, they have to do some research. Who are, for which part? For the sale? Yes. So that, and one of the advantages of contracts is you start to be able to see at what date the sale took place versus what date the loan took place. That's why contracts for loans are very important, because you want to be able to know what date things happen, because whichever one comes first, they're the people who have the original claim to land, right? So, because of course this person who had this loan and this land, he might not even be the original owner of the land either. Somebody else might be able to. So land, right? You have to do your research. When you go to purchase something, you have to find out whether the person you're purchasing it from has a lot of debt, because if he has a lot of debt, he might wind up losing the land, and then they're going to come out for you and take it back from you.
Or if it's food is expired or whatever it is.
You never want to eat expired food, but that's for a different reason. So that's what you have to worry about. Okay? That's what we call it. Nechasim Shigish Machrayas. Land always is considered to have responsibility. You're always responsible for the sale, so that if it gets confiscated, I have to return the money. I always have that responsibility. So we call land nechasim shigesh lenachrayas. Land is property that has responsibility on it, and that basically it holds mortgages on it. Now, not the case with other movable property. If I have a car, right, the bank cannot come and confiscate my car by Jewish law. Cannot confiscate my car based on the fact that I owe them $1,000. Unless, again, like we had with the woman, that the person says, I'm specifically mortgaging this object to this loan, then you can. But by default, all mortgages and loans are on the property that a person owns, not on the movable items that he owns. Okay? Because we're used to somebody getting their car possessed if they don't pay their car loan. In the Jewish law, the way that it would work, if you don't pay your car loan, they'll come and confiscate the value of the prop of your land from you, right? They might take a portion of your backyard, right? Because you didn't pay, but the car stays. Because the Kenyan, you own the car, they can't take that. Okay, so that would be a distinction in Jewish law versus, the way the way that Canadian law would work. But unless you specify that way, a person can specify saying this car is mortgaged to this loan, and I'll give you the car back if I don't pay. But that's again specific to the deal.
The last 1,000 or more years, Jewish law has to adapt to us being landless.
That's correct. And not only that, but we have a concept called Dina de Malchusa Dina. Dina de Malchusa Dina basically says that when it comes to economics, the prevailing custom of the country that you're in has authority. So generally speaking, if a debt is paid by repossessing the car, the Chachamim will back up that procedure in halakhic courts, despite the fact that, and we're talking about in absence of any other non-Jewish court rules or laws, this would be the Jewish way of looking at things. Okay. Now, galima, a coat, a garment, is ikre nichse. Garments are also called nechasim. How so? Ditznan, we have a Mishnah that shows us. She'ein lahen achrayas, those objects which do not hold mortgage or bear responsibility, like your garments, ein niknin ela b'meshicha, those cannot be purchased through money transactions or through a contract. The only way to get those is meshicha. I gotta pick it up. My acquire. How do I acquire it? Zuze ikroy nichse. Money is also called a possession. It's non, because the Mishnah says That we have a principle that land can help the acquisition of non-land items. If I have to transfer some non-land item to you, and especially is very helpful when the item is not present here. If the item is present, I say, here, I want you to have this cup. Great, I have the cup. Yay, that's wonderful. What if I want you to have this cup? Oh, I left it at home. You know what? I'm going to write you a contract. You'll own a piece of my driveway. And then by the fact that you bought a piece of my driveway, you now also own the bottle of wine that I wanted to give you that's in my house right now. Okay, so I can do it that way. Because I can sell the land using the other transactions, using money, using a contract, or using the chazaka by showing my ownership over it. And the money follows the transaction of the land. How so? Here's a story. Kahal Yereim Papa. This is a good story. Stories are always nice. Here comes Rav Papa. Havuli tracer alfi zuze bechozoi. So he had a very substantial 12,000 zuz loan at Chozoi's house. Now, the problem is with having a substantial is that the person who owed him the money lived far away. It wasn't so simple for him. He couldn't just pop over and get it. So he wanted the fellow to send him the money. The problem is that when the money is on its way from the person who is returning the money to Rav Papa, who's responsible if there's a robber or if something gets lost on the way? The answer is that until the person who owns the money gets the money back, then it's not returned yet. So therefore, the person who has the money, the 12,000 zuz right now, didn't want to return the money other than to hand it to Rav Papa directly. If you show up, I'll give you the money, but I'm not handing it to some random shliach guy, because if he runs off with the money or he trips and it falls off a cliff or whatever, I'm going to have to pay you another 12,000 zuz. So I'm not willing to send it, right? It's like we don't want to put cash in the mail, right? This is the same thing, right? Nobody wants to do that. So what did he do? Ikninhu niale l'Rav Shmuel bar Acha. So what he did was, Rav Papa knew that Rav Shmuel bar Acha, I guess he put it out on the chats, anybody traveling over to Chozoi's house, and Shmuel bar Acha was in fact making that trip. So what he did was, he said, Shmuel bar Acha, you're my good friend and I trust you. I am transferring over I'm going to transfer over the loan to you, agav asif b'debese, based on transferring over the corner of my house. It doesn't have to be a large amount of land, just a little piece, whatever. Since I can transfer over a piece of karka of land, now you're the owner of the loan. Okay? And because he can't transfer the loan with the money not being present. So how's he going to transfer the loan to give it to Shmuel bar Acha? The answer is, if I sell you a piece of my house, then when I transfer ownership of that house to you, the movable property goes along with it.
Okay, so now the guy gets a piece of the house and he gets the loan.
That's correct.
Okay. So he's in the win right now.
Well, that Shmuel bar Acha gets this whole loan. Now, the idea is that Rav Papa trusted him and knew that what he was going to do is when he collected the money, he'd come and give it back to Rav Papa as a present, right? This wasn't supposed to make... If he was a scoundrel, he could... That's correct. Now, theoretically, if Rav Papa wanted to, Rav Papa could write a condition in the contract that says that I'm selling this to you on condition that you return my 12,000, you return the 12,000 zuz to me, or a condition that you pay me 12,000 zuz later on.
And the house?
And also give me the house too, right? Or it could be also a sale of Manas last year. So basic bottom line is there are ways to, right? But the point of this is that he was playing a clever deal using the intricacies of the laws of transference of property in order to make Shmuel the owner of a loan that Shmuel is nowhere near, right? So he's using the land to make that transfer. So Ki also, when Rav Shmuel bar Acha showed up with the money, nafak la'apei ad tovech. He ran all the way out. Either ad tovech was the name of a place or halfway to the place. He got so excited, he ran all the way out to meet him halfway, going, thank you. He was so glad. Otherwise, he wasn't going to, this is a large sum of money that he wasn't going to be able to get back. And Shmuel bar Acha, helped him out with this. Okay. So that shows us, the point of this is that this nechasim got transferred, which was money, on through the land, and therefore money is called nechasim. Shtara ikr nechasim. contracts are considered to be property. Now, Da'amar Rabbi Bar Yitzchak. Rabbi Bar Yitzchak says, Shnei shtaros hein. There's two types of contracts. It's important to know the difference between types of contracts. Amar, let's say a person says, Zachu basada zeliploni v'kisvulo es hashtar. Let's say a person says, you know what I want you to do? I'd like for you to go into this field and do me a favor. You know, my friend Shimon is not here. So could you go into the field, claim the ownership of the field on his behalf? Now we have a rule that a person can be a messenger for another person and benefit him without him being present. We presume that the other person would want him to do that. Let's take, for example, always a good, do you need the witness? You don't, for the contract? Yeah, the contract can need witnesses. That's, we're going to hold on to that in a second, right? So let's take, for example, I'm not allowed to do business on Shabbos, right? Rabbinic prohibition, I can't do business. That includes all transference of ownership. So I'm going over to the Wald's house, and I'd like to bring my tzafona wine over to the Wald's house for Shabbos gift. Problem is, I can't give him a bottle of wine on Shabbos. So there's a couple ways to do it. It could be my bottle of wine, and we can just share it at the table. That's totally fine. It could be my bottle of wine the whole time. But I don't want him to have to open the bottle of wine when we're there. He could keep it, and he can serve it next week or enjoy it, you know, on a Wednesday night, whatever he wants to do. So I'd like to give him a bottle of wine. So what do? Before Shabbos, I'm going to give it to him. I get to shul. He's having a different minyan that day. I don't see him there. So what do? I go over to Aviv and I say, do me a favor. This is Jeff's bottle of wine. Will you accept it on his behalf? Now Aviv's going to say, I'd love to be his messenger, but doesn't he have to tell me to be his messenger? I can't do something without his permission. The answer is, you don't need to ask his permission.
What if you don't want her?
Sorry?
What if you don't know want her?
Well, better. Whatever you don't know in this case helps, right? If what I don't know helps, then you can go ahead and proceed. If, however, you are going to say, hey, you know what? Accept this, you know, whatever negative thing on his behalf. You can't do that without his permission. So a person can receive something without him being aware. So that's what they do here. You're going to go and take possession of this field on behalf of my friend, and that works. Now, he says two things. Go ahead and take possession of the field for them, and I want you to write a contract. So this is you who is right. There must be two people here from writing a contract, right? You need to have two signatures on it. So, and that's why it says in plural, right? Kisvu lo es ashtar, right? In plural, two people write the shtar. Now, they go out in the field. They take possession of the field. Then they run inside and they go grab some parchment. And he goes, you know what? Change my mind. I don't want you guys to write the contract, right? Why? Different reasons why a person wouldn't want a contract. I don't want people knowing that I transferred over my fields, because if people find out about that, they'll realize I don't have as much money as they thought I do. I don't want word getting out. So you know what? Forget the contract. Okay. So the fellow comes over, he says, forget the contract. Choser b'shtar veinu choser b'sada. The deal does not get canceled. The field is still possession. Why? Because the field got transferred through chazaka. They took possession of the field. The contract, however, doesn't get written. Why? Because the contract was simply a document recording the fact that they did indeed take possession of the field. It's an evidence piece.
So what's the benefit again with the contract?
So this might be a benefit to this, even if the deal doesn't. Let's say the fellow just doesn't want this contract floating around because he doesn't want. Let's say he's gonna, somebody else is gonna come and start collect. He's gonna collect a debt from somebody else, and he doesn't want somebody being able to collect this from him on a mortgage and use the contract as a proof of what date the transfer took place, right? Maybe a whole bunch of reasons that the guy doesn't like this contract idea. But he decided, I don't want to record this in a contract, right? For whatever reason, he decided he's not interested in recording this contract. He can decide to cancel the contract, but he can't cancel the transfer to the field because that already happened. Because we have such a thing as a contract that simply is a record of an event that took place. That's all this contract is. Next one. However, al menas shetichtavu lo es ashtar. So then, let's say he says, the condition here's what I want you to do. I want you to acquire this by writing the contract. Now, we have a different type of opinion here. The acquisition is through the writing of the contract. The contract is not merely a document that records, we hereby witness the possession of this land. The contract is the bill of sale. Hence, choser bein b'shtar bein b'sada. If he changes his mind and says, nah, don't write that, then the whole sale is off. There was nothing that transferred the property because the contract itself was designed to transfer the property. An indication of a subtle difference between two types of contracts. One being a contract where we're just witnessing an event. One being that the contract is actually the cause of the transference, right? The difference between somebody writing, we hereby declare that we watch so-and-so and so-and-so get married versus this is a marriage certificate, that this marriage certificate makes these two people married, right? That's the difference. For Rav Chia bar Abin Amar, Rav Chia bar Abin says, there's a third way for a contract to work. He says, Amar Rav Huna, he says, Rav Huna, Shlosha Shtaros, and there's three ways. Trey, Hani, Damar, and there are two that we already said. Iduch. This third one is in Kodem Mocher V'Kosav Es Ashtar Ka'osa Shishaninu. Let's say a person gets up and he writes the contract, he's eager to sell. So he writes the contract like we said. So then, Kosvin Shtar L'Mocher V'Alfa Pisha Ein Lo Kachim, we can write the contract for the person who's selling it, even though there's no purchaser there. When the person who's the buyer actually gets the property, he is considered to be the owner of the contract. What he does is this: he says, "I know that I don't want a buyer changing his mind, right? So here's what I'm going to do. And he's going to want his contract. So I'll have the contract ready made. As soon as the person collects the property, the contract becomes part of his. It's like the certification that goes with it, and that contract becomes the property of the purchaser as soon as he purchases the land. Okay, that's another way that it goes. Vezuhi sheshaninu. This is what we learned. How is that working? It's working the same way that we learned before. Once you transfer land over, the movable property gets transferred with it. Well, what do we see from here? That the contract is considered movable property. That's how the transference is working. So again, another item is considered to be movable property. The kesef v'shtar b'chazaka, once you transfer with money, with a loan document, or with an ownership of a proof of ownership of an action that indicates that it's really yours, that is considered to be transferred. Now, also animals are considered to be property, right? We discussed all the things. It's not, we learned in Mishnah. Hamaknish nechasav. Person says, I declare my possessions to be holy to the base of Mikdash. V'aisa behen behema re'uya legabi mizbeach. Now he's got some animals that can be slaughtered as sacrifices because you have lots of different possessions. Your car gets donated to the base of Mikdash, so then it gets donated for the purpose of temple upkeep, right? Maybe that the treasury might be able to put some things in the trunk and drive it around, or they might sell it and take the money and be able to use the money in order to keep the base of Mikdash going. But if you've got animals and you consecrate the animals, then zcharim olos, then the male animals become a korban olah, because you're allowed to make a donation for an olah sacrifice, and those have to be male animals. And when it comes to the female animals, yimachru l'tzarchei zivchei shlamim, they can be sold, and the purchases can be made for the purpose of bringing shlamim offerings. Okay, so there again, you see the word nichasim being used, and it refers to animals. Also, ophos ikri nichsi, birds are considered to be possessions. It's not, we learned in the Mishnah. Oph is bird in general and chicken in specific, right? Because everything is a yona is an oaf, but yona is an oaf, and oaf is not a yona. Hamakdish nechasav v'hayu bahen dvarim haruuyin legabe mizbeach. Let's say somebody, he consecrates all of his possessions, and amongst his possessions, he has things that can be used for the korbanos, the slaughtering of the mizbeach. Yenos, for example, he's got wine. Shmanim, he's got some oil. The ophos, he's got some birds. So then, again, this Mishnah, that was the point to bring, is that these are nechasav. He's makdish all of his possessions. His possessions includes any of these items. These items are considered to be possessions. Tefillin, ikri nechasi. Your tefillin are also called your possessions. So therefore, if you consecrate, if you tell somebody you have all my possessions, your tefillin goes with it. It's not. We learn a Mishnah. Hamakdish nechasav. So then somebody says that all of his possessions are donated to the base of Mikdash. So then malin lo tefillin. Then we take we check we do an evaluation of the value of his tefillin, because he wants to keep his tefillin, right? Because he needs to wear them, so you can't take his tefillin. So what do? You evaluate how much money they're worth, and that's how much he owes to the base of Mikdash. Okay. So malin lo tefillin. Iboy lahu. So now comes the question. All of these things are included in your possessions. What about Sefer Torah Mai? What about a Sefer Torah? Is a Sefer Torah considered possessions? Well, why not? Kaven dolum is daving, the usher lizvunei. It's prohibited to sell a Sefer Torah. You're not allowed to just sell a Sefer Torah. It's considered a disgrace for a Sefer Torah. Huh? Well, you're talking about asking somebody to donate in order to write the Sefer Torah. That's for sure you're allowed to do. I'm talking about you've got a kosher Sefer Torah, and now you want to buy a new car, so you want to sell your Sefer Torah and buy a car. Can't do that. You can donate the Sefer Torah. You can bring the Sefer Torah for you, but you cannot take the money and sell a Sefer Torah. Gemara in other places discusses in the Masechus Megillah whether I can sell one Sefer Torah, buy a new Sefer Torah, things like this. But it's not. You cannot just sell your Sefer Torah. So that's number one. Oh, Dilma, or perhaps there are circumstances you can sell your Sefer Torah. Kevin de Mizdavin Lilmod Torah, the Lisa Isha. Let's say a person needs to pay tuition in order to be able to learn Torah. Right? The whole reason of having a Torah is so you learn. Well, then if I have no money to learn, so then the Sefer Torah is worthless to me. So I have to be able to sell the Torah in order to be able to learn Torah, or I need to get married. Right? The only thing I possess is the Sefer Torah, but marriage is more important.
For mikvah?
No, not for mikvah. Nichsaihu, so then it's considered to be a possession. Teku, so that's a question that we're going to have to understand. Right? Not so clear. It's considered possessions. Okay, more cases. You ever hear of the book, like You Be the Umpire? You know, there's these cases where they would just have watch old baseball games, right? They would have like, You does the best things, right? They show a play and they're like, you make the call, right? So these are this kinds of gemaras. These are fun.
If the sofer is made to Sefer Torah, it's also
yes, well, he's selling his labor, not the Torah, right? That's a very important point, right? You hire a sofer to write the Torah and pay him to write the Torah, right? He doesn't own the Torah. That's a very important one, right? Because he can't, if he's coming and says, I hear all my Sifrei Torah, big problem. You don't ever see that, right? You never see somebody have a showroom of Sifrei Torah. You commission the sofer to write a Torah for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the ownership of that Torah while he's writing it, who owns that Torah? You own it?
So that comes into an important machlokas, which is in Bava, but you have to wait 6 more years for that, 6.5 more years for that one. That argument is when I hire somebody to do work for me, is the person, at what point do I owe them? Do I owe them to pay them when they complete the work? Or do I slowly owe them money along the way? And then it's a loan and then I only pay them at the end? That means that the question is whether the person who's writing it owns all of the material all along the way and then only transfers over the material at the end, or whether really the transference happens piecemeal along the way. So that's conversation for that. You have to wait some time. I don't know, all the ones that were in museums are purchased. Yeah, they were probably, you find, let's say, for example, ones from the Holocaust or something like that, where they find, the Sefer Torah that was from a shul or something that was in such and such a place, and they decide that probably not kosher anyway, let's keep it for a display. Imi de Rav Zutra bar Tuvia. Story is, Rav Zutra bar Tuvia's mother, Kasvinhu l'nichsal l'Rav Zutra bar Tuvia. She wrote all of her possessions over to her son, Rav Zutra bar Tuvia. De boilin subi le l'Rav Zvid, because she wanted to get married to Rav Zvid. But she didn't want Rav Zvid to inherit all of her possessions, as we've described. She's a Baruch, right? In Siba, she did get married, they garsha, and then they got divorced. Okay? So now, Asya Lakami de Rav Bibi bar Abaye. So she came before Rav Bibi bar Abaye and said, Amar Mishum in Subi. So they came before and she said, I want my possessions back. And her son said, no way, they're mine. Right? So he said, Mishum and Sube, the whole reason you gave it to me was so that you could get married, Vaha in Siba, and you did. Congratulations. Here, I'm going to give them to you so I can get married. And then you got married. And so that's great. Happily ever after. I'm glad to keep the possessions. Amar le, Ravuna Brader of Yeshua. Ravuna Brader of Yeshua said, Mishum de asu mimulai, amrisu mili mulaisa, because you come from a place called mimulai, short people, or short-sighted people, whatever. You have made a statement that is short-sighted. That's a foolish argument. Even according to the opinion that says that the mavrechas, the circumstance of mavrechas, acquires the object, Hani mili hecha de lo galya dasa. That even, in other words, even if there was an opinion that said that the son would be able to keep the possessions in the circumstance where his mother gave him the possessions, that is of the circumstance where the woman didn't say anything. She just said, here's a gift for you, and gives it over to her son, and then she goes and gets married. Then at least there may be an opinion that says the son can keep that. But in this case, it wasn't even that. She said, I'm giving it to you so that I can get married. And Siba, the Irgisha, and so she got married and got divorced, give her the money back. So that is how that case came. Imim de Rami Bar Chama. Here's a story of Rami Bar Chama's mom. Rami Bar Chama's mother, Be'ursa, she was a Shchiv Meira, and Be'ursa kasvesinhu linichsa l'Rami Bar Chama. She wrote at night all of her possessions and gave them to her son, Rami Bar Chama. Betzafra, the next morning, kasvesinhu l'Rav Ukva Bar Chama. She gave all of her possessions in the morning to her brother, Ukva Bar Chama, to his brother, Ukva Bar Chama. Okay? Now, also Rami Bar Chama lekamed Rav Sheshes. Rami Bar Chama, she seems to have passed away. So now, Rami Bar Chama comes running over to Rav Sheshes, and Ukme benichse. And he said, Rav Sheshes said, you're right, you're the real owner, because she gave it to you first. Azil Rav Ukva Bar Chama coming to Rav Nachman. Rav Ukva Bar Chama, meanwhile, went to a different beis din, probably unbeknownst to each other, because otherwise they wouldn't do two beis dins, wouldn't have ruled on the same case. But he comes ready to Rav Nachman, Ukme benichse, and he said that Ukva Bar Chama could keep it. So now they've got two conflicting beis dins. So the beis dins had to work this out. So Asa Rav Sheshes lekamed Rav Nachman. Rav Sheshes comes over to Rav Nachman and says, Amarle, my time Ukme Mar the Rav Ukva Bar Chama. Why did you decide? Not the case. You decided that Ukva Bar Chama gets the money. That shouldn't be the halacha. Imishum dehadra ba. What's your consideration? I mean, she gave money to Rami Bar Chama at night, and now she's giving it to Ukva Bar Chama in the morning. Are you suggesting it's because she changed her mind? Maybe that's what it sounds like. What your ruling indicates she changed her mind. She first thought it was going to go to the first one, and in the morning she changed her mind. If that's the answer, Shchiva, but she died. So therefore, since she ended up dying, remember that when it comes to a matna shchiv meira, only the property can only return to the original owner. It goes back to the original owner if the person gets better. So therefore, if she gave it to Rami Bar Chama, you're right, she'd get her property back if she got better. But she didn't get better. Hence, the property goes to the person that she gave it to first. And she can't get it back and then give it to somebody new. Amar Le, so he said back to him, Hachi Amar Shmuel. He says, yeah, but you missed something that Shmuel said. Kol she'ilu amad chozer, any circumstance where if the shchiv mira would have gotten better, the money would go back to the original person, chozer b'matnaso, so then that person can also change their mind in who they give it to in the meantime. Why so? Because there's a second element to a shchiv mira that's very important. A shchiv mira's property transfers at the point of death, when somebody dies. So therefore, as long as the person's still alive, if they change their mind and say give it to somebody else, the transfer hasn't occurred yet. So they still have ownership of their item. So therefore, they can change who they want to give it to. So if they said, so even though she said Rami Bar Chama at night, the fact that she said Ukva Bar Chama in the morning means that she changed her mind. And she's entitled to do so as a shchiv meira. Normally, when it comes to other matnas bari, a healthy person present, once I give it away, I say, Jeff, I'll give you a birthday present, and I give it to you. And then I go over and I see Yehuda, and I say, I want to give you the same birthday present. I can't do that. I already gave it. It's not mine anymore. When it comes to a shchiv meira, I can. Because I'm saying, Jeff, I'm going to give this to you. It's going to be yours as of tomorrow. And then I go to Yehuda and say, hey, Yehuda, guess what? This is yours as of right now. My second statement is going to be able to stand. It's a good idea, right? Especially if you give it away twice. It does not sound like Rami Bar Chama and Ukva Bar Chama were disputing the facts. So maybe, I'm going to presume that they didn't necessarily have to, because they're both agreeing, right? Rami Bar Chama, Ukva doesn't like Ukva Bar Chama is saying, she never gave it to you, right? Amor Da'amar Shmuel la'atzmo. Shmuel is saying this He's saying even when Shmuel says he can get it back, the person has to get better. That's only if he gives it to himself. Li'acher mi'amar le. He said, but a person can change their mind and give it to somebody else. So Amar le. So he said back to him, the Perish Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said very clearly that was the case. A person can change his mind and give it to whoever he wants, not just take them back for himself. As long as they have not died yet, they can change their mind in their gift of a shkif meirah. That's totally fine. You can do that. And Shmuel is very important because we see arguments between Rav and Shmuel all the time. Shmuel was in Nardai. That was his area of yeshiva. Rav and Shmuel have arguments all through the Gemara. The rule for halacha is that we always follow Rav when it comes to prohibitions, laws of what's prohibited. So if there was an argument about whether something's kosher or not kosher, the halacha always follows Rav. When it comes to money cases, the halacha always follows Shmuel. So we're going to see a few cases here where Shmuel, his opinion gets quoted, and that's because Shmuel's always right, because we're dealing with monetary cases. And this is what's very important to understand about a shchiv meirah, because we've talked about inheritances. Inheritances is a transfer of money, but really that's a Torah rule. So it follows the rules of Rav, of prohibitions. But when it comes to gifts, I'm going to give you money, I'm going to give you money, I'm going to give this, and that follows Shmuel.
In order to get married, you transfer the money to someone else. Is there cases where the other person dies and now the husband is entitled?
Well, so if that person dies while they still are in possession, their heirs would probably get it. The question is going to be whether she can collect it back. Well, the husband isn't the heir, right? But the new husband isn't the heir.
To the firstborn son.
Let's say she gives it to her son, right? And now the son dies. It's going to go to that son's relatives, not the new father, right? Now the question is not the new husband, right? Now the question that you're asking is a fair question. Is then what happens if the mother gets divorced? Can the mother now get it back from the heirs of the original person? Seems like the answer is yes, but I'm not 100%. I have to really get that thought on how that works. Imei to Rav Amram, since Rav Amram Chasida. This is the mother's Gemara. So now we're at Rav Amram Chasida's mother. What happened? Havala Meluga Dishtari. She had a whole container full of contracts, right? These are basically contracts. People owe money. So they sound like they're not expired, ready to collect. So she had all these documents. Kikashachva, when she was sick, Amra lihavi la Amram bri. I want to give it to my son Amram. Asu achva lekami Rav Nachman. The brother came along and came to Rav Nachman, Amrulei. They said to him, V'halo mashach. He says he never acquired ownership. She said, I want to give these contracts, but he never came. Amram never came and said, here, I pick it up, it's mine. So without a kinyan, how did they get transferred? Amar lahu, and this we already sort of know the answer to, because we already know the rules of the shchiv meirah, right? Amar lahu, he said to them, Divra shchiv meirah kiksuvenu k'mesurindam. That's the way shchiv meirah works. Shchiv meirah works without an acquisition. It's as though they're written and given over, even if they're not. Okay, next case. Achsei de Rav Tuvi bar Rav Masna. This is a good one. Rav Tuvi bar Rav Masna's sister. Kasvesinhu linichsal Rav Tuvi bar Rav Masna. So she gave up over all of her possessions to Rav Tuvi bar Rav Masna B'tzafra in the morning. Lepanya also Rav Achtavoy bar Rav Masna, and so in the afternoon, later on in the afternoon, so comes along Rav Achtavoy bar Rav Masna, who is the brother, and Bacha, and he comes over and cries it to her and says, Amar Allah, Hashta Amar Mar, Tzurba Mirabanan, Umar Rav Tzurba Rabbanan. People are going to say, why did the sister give the money to one of the brothers and not to the other one? The answer is, because he's the Talmid Chacham, and she wanted to support her good brother in Kolel, and this one she doesn't think is very good at all, and he's crying, he's all upset because now everybody's going to say that about me. So she feels bad for the other brother, so Kasvasinhu Niale, so she also wrote some to him. Okay, so now, also Kami to Rav Nachman, they brought the case to Rav Nachman. Amar Le, he said to him, Hachi Amar Shmuel, is what Shmuel says, Kol Shilu Amad Choser Rantos. As long as she gets better, and in fact that's what happened in this case, she got better, So then she can retract her original, right, what she was originally giving away, because she gave away everything. So therefore she retracts. So then she can retract in her presence. Okay, so that's another good case. There is conversation to have in here about something called animum, if a poor person is a person allowed to steal an opportunity from somebody else, right? It's a conversation, right? Let's say, I am going to somebody, let's say I'm collecting for a time. And so I go knock on somebody's door and he says, yeah, I love to give to yeshivas. I'm going to give you $10,000. And I'm so happy. I come to shul and I tell my friends, $10,000, this guy's going to give me $10,000. And the guy's listening next to me is from some other yeshiva. And he goes, great, that's awesome. And he sneaks over to the guy's house, knocks on the door and says, hi, I'm from a yeshiva. Can I have money? He goes, yeah, here's $10,000. And I go back in the morning to get my money. And the guy says, I don't have anything left. I already gave it, right? Is the person who's collecting doing the wrong thing by collecting tzedakah, right? Taking care of an opportunity that was for something. The answer is you really can't do that, right? You're not allowed to steal somebody else's opportunity. It's not really Geneva because it wasn't mine for real. It was just an opportunity. But we learn in other Gemaras and be a little bit beyond our conversation. You're not allowed to do that. So the question is on the second brother, how is he allowed to do what he's done here, right? He basically took the opportunity away from the other brother, that conversation. Achsei de Rav Dimi bar Rav Yosef, the sister of Rav Dimi bar Yosef, Havalei Piskasa de Pardesa, she had an orchard. Okay? So Kol Amos de Havas Cholsha, she was a very sickly person. And whenever she would get sick, Hava Makanya le Nihale, she would give her brother, Rav Dimi bar Yosef, the orchard. Right? When I get sick, I give it to my brother, calls her brother over, come here, I'm dying, here's my orchard, and then she'd get better. And of course, she got better, so the orchard goes back to her, right? So what happens is, V'chikaima havas hadraba, every time she'd get better, it would go back. So, Zimnachada, one time, Cholsha, she got sick. Shalchale, she sent to her brother, and she said, Talk, come on, Connie, come and collect, I've got an orchard for you, right? And he's like, this is like Charlie Brown in the football already. It's like, I'm not, right? So, Shalach, he says, Shalach, he sent back, Lo Baina, I'm not coming. I'm busy. I could come. You're dying every other Thursday. I'm not coming anymore. Shalchale, so she sent to him, Ta Kani Kol Hecha de Boys. Look, you can acquire it any way that you want. I just want you to have it. I'm dying. She's sure it's real this time. You'll come, any type of kinyan you want to make, that'll be fine. So, also, so he knows what to do, because he's learning this Gemara. What is he going to do? He's going to leave her a piece. Right? Because we said, as long as it's shchiv mirah, if she leaves over any of it, then then it doesn't go back to her, even if she gets better. So he goes, fine. It sounds like they sent some messengers. There's no phone, yeah. That's right. That's right. So, Azal Shaira, the Kanu Mina, he acquired it by leaving over a piece for her. So now, even if she gets better, the halacha should be his, right? Kikaima, sure enough, she gets better. Hadraba, so she says, it's mine again, I'm taking it back. Also, Lekami to Rav Nachman, so she comes to Rav Nachman's case. Shalach lei, so he's refusing to return it. He says, what are you talking about? I acquired it, and I left over a piece, this is mine. So they sent, Rav Nachman's based and sent a message to, what was it, Rav Dimi, right? It was Rav Dimi? Yosef, I can't remember the name was. It was Rav Dimi bar Yosef. So they send him a message. So, they said, come to Beis Din. Lo asa, he refused to come to Beis Din. Amar, my is, hi, Shairov Economina. He says, why should I bother coming? I know the halacha, and I acquired it in exactly the right way. There's no way I'm coming. Shalach lei, so the Beis Din sent him a message. Ilo asis, machinalach besilu de lo mabadama. If you don't show up, we're going to whip you with lashes that don't bleed. Basically, we're going to put you in excommunication if you don't show up. You don't ignore a court summons. So, okay. So he came. Amar lehu l'sadi. So the court says, he said to the witnesses, okay, Heichi hava ma'asa. Tell me the story. What was the case? Amrulei. So they said to Rav Nachman, Amra, she said, Hachi, this is what she says, Vai de kamisa, oh, woe is me, I'm dying. So he says, she says, I'm dying, so let's do this. So, that's what this woman said. Amar Lahu. So Rav Nachman says to them, Im Kain, Hava Mitzvah Machmas Misa. This isn't a Shchiv Meirah case. This is somebody who commanded because they thought they were going to die. This is somebody who made a specific condition. Woe is me, I'm dying. Therefore, take my property. Even if I didn't give over everything, the property is conditional. The transfer of property is conditional on my death. So therefore, she can go back. And Rav Dimi Bar Yosef lost the property. Okay. Rabbi Gisselson, should we continue for another couple minutes while we wait for people, or? Okay, good. Let's do it again. Do it again. Itmar matna shchiv meirah b'miktzas. So when if somebody gives over the shchiv meirah, gives over only part of their property. Amrua rabbanan kamei derava mishmei de marzutra brei de Rav Nachman. So they said, the rabbanan said in front of Rava, in the name of Marzutra, the son of Rav Nachman, Damar mishmei de Rav Nachman, who said it in the name of Rav Nachman himself. Harehi kematnas bari. This is a full and inclusive gift because he left over part of the property, and that is the equivalent to a gift of a healthy person. But in some ways, it is like a property of a shchiv meirah. How so? Bari. How is it like a healthy person's gift? Shim amad. If the person gets better, eno choser, the property doesn't go back. But in some ways, it is a property of considered a gift like a shchiv meirah. Delo boy kinyan, because in order for the transfers to take place, you don't need an act of acquisition, right? It's in the matna shchiv meirah. Generally speaking, all you need to do is be able to say it, and then it gets transferred over. But Amar lehu Rava says, wait a second. Lav amina lehu lo titlu buki sriki b'Rav Nachman. Haven't I told you don't hang empty bottles on Rav Nachman? What does that mean? Don't talk nonsense in the name of Rav Nachman. That's not what he said. Right? That's not what he said. You're misquoting Rav Nachman. Hachi Amar Rav Nachman. This is what Rav Nachman really said. Harehi kematnas bari. It is entirely like a healthy person's gift. Uboi kinyan. And in order for this gift to have any impact at all, it must have an act of acquisition. Since you're not transferring over everything, this is not a shchiv meirah present. Hence, it really does need an act of acquisition. Eisvei Rava Rav Nachman. So Rava asked Rav Nachman a question. I'll show you a proof that isn't the case. Shir karka kol shehu. The Mishnah says if you leave over any amount of land, not so kayemes, then the gift stands even after the person dies, even if the person gets better. So my lav de lo kanamine, isn't that a case where there was no kinyan, no transference took place? So the answer is lo. You misunderstand the Mishnah. The Mishnah is de kanamine. He did make an acquisition. An acquisition is critical if you're not giving over the entire property, and it's not a shchiv meirah, he's maintaining, and you have to make a transfer. Ihachi, if that's so, if there's a transference taking place, ema seifa, how do you explain the end of the Mishnah? Lo shir karka kol shehu, that if you don't leave over any of the land, so then ein naso kayemes, then his present does not stand. So now, because once he gets better, because it goes back to the original owner. So then v'i dekonomine. Now, if there's an act of acquisition, if he literally gave the item to the person and he said it's mine, I hereby own it. So then amai ein matnaso kayemes. Then why, even if he gave over everything, why? How can you? What's the mechanism by which that goes back to the original owner? So Amar Lei, so he answered back, Hachi Amar Shmuel. This is why we keep bringing these things. Shmuel. This is what Shmuel said. Shchiv meirah shekasav kol nechasav lachir. A shchiv meirah who gives away all of his property, afal pi shekanu miyodo, even though as we said, it's not necessary to perform a kinyan. But let's say somebody does do a kinyan. You might think that the kinyan, the act of transference, makes it so super strong that you can't go back on it. Amad, if the person gets better, choser, then for sure it goes back. Why? B'yadua, it is known shelohaya mitzave ela machmas misa, that the only reason that you made this deal is because you knew that you were going to die. That's the whole. Because why? Because you gave away everything. Therefore, even if you made a kinyan, it was considered contingent on the fact that you were going to die. Do we have? Okay, good. Well, not good, but you know what I mean. Eisvei, Rav Misharshia l'Rava. Rav Misharshia asks Rava the question. Maisa, the Imon shel b'nei Rochel. There was a story of the mother of the children of Rochel. Rochel must have been the father, right? So the mother of Bnei Rochel. Shaisa Chola, she was sick. The Amra, and she said, Tinasein kibinasi labiti. Give my kibinasi, my scarf, or some kind of expensive garment, to my daughter. The hu b'shnei masar moneh. It was worth 1,200 moneh. It was a very expensive item. Umesa, and then she died. The kaimu divareha. Now, she probably had other possessions as well, but she died. She left over a portion, and they established that the item should go to the daughter. So why? Hasam mitzvah machmas misa. The answer is because there's no kinyan. There was no act of acquisition. So why? So the answer is because this was mitzvah machmas misa. This was a gift given on condition that the person was going to die, and therefore she in fact was able to acquire because she in fact did die. Okay. Esvei Ravina l'Rava. Ravina asks Rava the following question: Haomer tnu get zeli ishti. Let's say a person says, "Give this divorce contract to my wife." Ushar shikhr zela abdi, or this freedom document to my slave. Umeis and die, and then the person dies. Lo yitnu la'achar misa. You're not allowed to give that after the person dies, right? Because there is no such thing as these documents don't exist. You can't divorce your wife after you're already dead, right? You cannot free a slave after you're already dead. You need to be alive to do those things. So therefore, even if you wrote it first, once you die, before it's given, you can't give it, right? It's too late. It's what? Get is not always bad, right? We think it's bad because she can't marry a Kohen, but it's good because then she doesn't have to yibum, right? So that's why a person might be wanting to do this. Get shikra for avodim is a bad thing, generally speaking, right? Yeah. A freeing slaves is not encouraged. Halach be not encouraged to do, right? Now, tenu mane liploni. If she says, give the money over to so and so umeis, and then the person dies, yidnu le'achamisa. That you do give the person after the death. Well, why? Umimai. The lo kanu minei. So umimai. So we're going to say this clearly should be a circumstance where the kinyan didn't exist before the person died. Dumya the get, because the Mishnah is comparing two cases, just like the get, where the get wasn't given before the person died. So ma get lav bar kinyan afhainami de lo kanu minei. Just like the get couldn't have been acquired before the person died, that's the whole case. So too, the gift is given before the person died, or the gift was not acquired before the person died. So the question is, why is it that it goes to the person after the person's death? So the answer is Hasam Nami. That's also a circumstance where there's extra authority to it because the mitzvah machmas misa, it does get acquired even without a contract because it was on condition that the person would die. We'll stop here. Continue from